A very good morning and huge welcome to everyone who's joining us today for our session 3 live webinar, How Cybersecurity Became the #1 Threat in the New Normal. My name is Jane and I'm the moderator for today's session. Okay. Before we start our webinar, I would just like to briefly explain on some of the features for this GoToWebinar platform, just in case this is the first time that you are using this. As you can see from your screen, there's a few features on your right-hand side. On top of the mute unmute button, there is an arrow button that allows you to either hide or unhide the panel. And under the mute button, there is a document file symbol, and this is a place for you to download any related brochures and data sheets. Next up, there is a hand feature. This is for you to raise your hand if you have any questions to ask along the way, or if you need us to stop during the session for something. Then on your right-hand side, under the first audio session, it's a section that's for questions. This is where you may type in your questions if you have any along the way. We'll be having a Q&A session at the end of the webinar to address all the questions. Okay, if you face any issues during the webinar, don't hesitate to let us know. We would be more than happy to come to your assistance. All right, so now that we got this covered, let's get into our main topic today. Okay, thank you all once again for taking the time to attend our Series 3 webinar, which is exclusively brought to you by CTI Resources, Aviva, Cybersecurity Malaysia, and Versec. Our topic for today's series is on cybersecurity. There are actually 5 series in total for our webinar, today being the 3rd series of them all. After today's series, we still have 2 more webinars coming up, so do remember to mark your calendar on the date shown up here. So, okay, for today's webinar, we are very delighted to have 3 amazing speakers with us, namely Mr. Anwar, the Head of Industry Engagement and Collaboration of Cybersecurity Malaysia, Mr. Sarab, Vice President Sales for ICS and Strategic Accounts of Versec, and Mr. Willie, Vice President for Marketing of Versec. As you all may already know, ever since the COVID-19 crisis hit, there has been a rapid shift for many companies to remote work. Though this shift has amplified the adoption of digital transformation and new technologies, this new working from norm has also created new security challenges for the ICS SCADA space. Since companies now have to allow employees to access to their organization's network and systems, they can no longer rely on isolated network or air gap to protect their critical systems. Hence, today we would like to dive more into these current issues that many companies are facing. Okay. First off, we would be having Mr. Anwar as our beloved presenter. Mr. Anwar is the Head of Industry Engagement and Collaboration of Cybersecurity Malaysia. Cybersecurity Malaysia is the National Cybersecurity Specialist Agency under the purview of KKMM, pursuant to the Federal Government Ministerial Order 2019, with effect from 21st May of 2018, Cybersecurity Malaysia is placed under Minister of Communications and Multimedia Malaysia. Just a little background, Cybersecurity Malaysia is committed to provide a broad range of cybersecurity innovation-led services, programs, and initiatives to reduce vulnerabilities of digital systems, at the same time strengthen Malaysia's self-reliance in cyberspace. So without further ado, let's welcome Mr. Anwar.
Hi, okay, I think I gotta start again, yeah. Okay, thank you for the kind introduction. Thank you for inviting me and having me here to share some of the experience that we have gone through over the last couple of years, couple of months, I guess. Sorry, can you hear me?
Your webcam is not on.
Okay, excuse me. Is it okay now?
Yes, you're good. Please continue.
Great, all right. As you can see, I have slightly different face now than before. Ever since the lockdown, I decided to keep my beard. So this is the new normal, I guess. Just to share a little bit, I think with what that we are going through now, not just in Malaysia, but all over the world, the threats of COVID-19, the threats of cybersecurity is becoming greater. And I doubt, we're going to get ever adjusted to this kind of situation where you are just locked down and can't move around much. And I think especially like for us here in Malaysia, the threats of being in emergencies and darurat, like they say in Malaysia. Can I have the next slide, please? Can I have the next slide? I guess if you look at it, I mean, there are so many things that are keeping us up awake at night. As CIOs or as IT experts, professionals, we are looking at the change velocity, how technology is changing, crisis management, cybersecurity issues, compliance, the culture of the organization, and now we have to add in one more C, COVID-19. So it's as if like we don't have enough things to worry about. All the volatility in terms of the technology, in terms of the political situations, the uncertainties, complexities, and ambiguity that's happening. So we really are going through unprecedented times. It's not easy. Things are really difficult, and I would like to share one experience that I went through a couple of months ago. Can I have the next slide, please? Uh, we were working to set up a system to register workers to go back to work, and unfortunately, on the day that we launched it, the system crashed because we had almost 180,000, more than 100,000 applicants coming in, and after cleaning it up, and readjusting, re-architecting the system. Uh, it's working well now. We managed to put almost 9 million people back to work, but the most, I think, the critical part was, can I have the next slide, please? As soon as the system was up and running, we were experiencing more than 5,000 attacks a day. So imagine, one system that we developed, 5,000 attacks. So what does this mean, to your organization? How many systems, how many applications are you having that are fronting to the public? And how many attacks are you experiencing? Are you able to catch them? Do you know what is going on in your system? Can I have the next slide, please? Okay. These are the issues. I mean, these are real incidents. This is what has been happening in Malaysia, I guess, all over the world. Malaysian Post was compromised and possibly a ransomware attack. Malindo, the university, facing a data breach, and of course Astro has gone through a couple of data breach as well. And even Microsoft, Microsoft claims that the total losses in economic losses for Malaysia is more than 12 billion US dollars. So yeah, this is serious. I mean, if you talk about cybersecurity, it is not just a threat now. It has been a threat before, and these are serious cases. Yeah. Can I have the next slide, please? So if you talk about IT systems, yes, we have been seeing viruses, malware, but I think in this new reality, we are having issues that affects SCADA systems, industrial control system, um, situation with VX works, and I mean, we are looking at billions of devices that are going to be connected. They are probably already connected, and this is where I guess my colleagues Sorab and Willie are going to be sharing about it. Next slide, please. If we look at what is happening now in terms of losses that are caused by cyber breaches, is more than coming to more than 2 trillion US dollars. But at the same time, we are also spending a lot of money. I mean, the annual spending on cybersecurity is like 150 billion. But the question to ask is this: are this money all well spent? What is happening? I mean, are we being given just fake medicines here? What is going to happen now? Okay, next slide, please. Looking at the threats that are the landscape, I mean, this is what is being reported and being detected by Cybersecurity Malaysia. We detect more than 3 million cases of malwares and botnets. Okay, more than 2 million spams, and almost 10,000 cases reported. This was last year, and this year, guys, it's like, I think it was like 50 to 80% higher. Can I have the next slide, please? These are the statistics, okay? And if we look at it, the top 3 incidents that are reported to Cybersecurity Malaysia are on fraud, intrusion, and malicious code. And on an average, we basically get about 1,000 cases reported to us. The sad thing is this: we are not the policeman of the internet, okay? So it is not mandatory to report to us. And even then, we get, like, 1,000 plus cases reported. And it is sad because a lot of these cases, it should have been done. I mean, if better awareness, if people are aware, they could have, stopped this. Can I have the next slide, please? So this is where, the situation is when it comes to the losses, online scams. The last couple of weeks, I think we have heard about all this Macau scam. And the sad thing is this, like what I said earlier, people need some awareness that this is happening. There are bad guys out there. There is no such thing that, you're going to win a lottery of 1 million or 2 million. And no, we don't have uncles in Libya or Iraq that has left any money for us. But unfortunately, people believe this. And another serious issue that is happening now are business email compromises. Okay. So can I have the next slide? Well, with all this, definitely the government need to do something. In fact, 2 weeks ago, we launched the new Malaysian cybersecurity strategy, which basically is to replace our old cybersecurity policy. Malaysian government established the national cybersecurity policy about 10 years ago. And the whole idea here is, can I have next slide, please? Okay, the whole idea for the national cybersecurity policy are to address what are the risks to the critical national information infrastructure. Now, coming back to the Malaysian cybersecurity strategy that was launched 2 weeks ago, we are not just looking at protection of the critical national information infrastructure. The cybersecurity strategy is encompassing, is holistic. It addresses issues to the public, to the rakyat, to the small and medium enterprises as well. But looking at what we have done earlier, we need to understand what are the threats, what are the vulnerabilities that affects the country, that affects our critical infrastructure. And with that, we need to come up with programs, frameworks on how to protect this. Okay, next slide, please. So this is the national cybersecurity policy. We have 8 trusts. We look at the governance, legislation and regulatory framework, the awareness, the need to have professionals, workers, skilled workers. We need to do our own, we need to have our own research and development for self-reliance. And of course, the compliance and enforcement, the emergency readiness, and international cooperation. So there are 10 sectors under the CNII: the defense and security, transportation, banking and finance, government, telecommunications, energy, of course, um, water, food, and health services. Okay, so these are the 10 sectors under the CNII National Cybersecurity Policy. Next slide, please. So on top of the National Cybersecurity Policy, we understand that as a small country, Malaysia, we depend on foreign products. So that is why we have our cryptography policy as well, or in Malay, we call it Dasar Cryptography Negara. So the whole idea here is that we must be able to create trust among the users and the communication for our cyberspace, okay? And we definitely need to encourage e-commerce activities. Okay, I think I'm running out of time. So can we just move on to the, sorry, can I have the next slide, please? Okay, it's okay. Move on, please. So on top of the cybersecurity policy, we have also come out with the ISO 27001, and this has been mandated for all CNIIs that, at least for the baseline, they must comply to ISO 27 or the ISMS standard. Okay, next, please. On top of this, our Security Commission, they released the guidelines for cyber resilience in the capital market. Okay, next, please. The whole idea is to have guidelines on cybersecurity risk management. In the event there are some incidents or data breach, who is responsible and how it should be reported to. Okay, and on top of these guidelines by the Security Commission, Bank Negara also came up with the risk management in IT. Next, please. Next, please. Okay. Can we go to the Bank Negara guideline? Thank you. Okay. So on top of the Bank Negara, it's okay. The risk management in technology, which is by our central bank. On the public sector, next slide, please. So for the public sector, we have this framework for the public sector. In Malay, we call it Rangka Kerja Keselamatan Cyber Sektor Awam. Um, Unfortunately, it's only until 2020, and it is time for us to relook into this and come up with a new framework as well. All right, guys. Next, please. On top of that guidelines, there are respective laws that we have in place. For example, we have the Digital Signature Act, telemedicine, personal data protection. Of course, we have the Computer Crime Act as well. Yeah. So I guess in terms of law, there is no particular law yet on cybersecurity, but it is definitely work in progress. Okay, next slide, please. So coming back to all this, how do we move forward? Okay, now definitely for the first thing is we need to mitigate the risk. Okay, we need to have some form of compliance to ISMS, to Trustmark, or to product certification. And for those that are in the ICS and SCADA, you need to look into what are the standards. For example, the ISA IEC 6244312. Okay, so on top of all this, what are the other aspects that you need to do? Yes, you have to comply to standards. Next slide, please. At the same time, you also need to relook back, okay, your approach to security. I guess gone are the days, when there is just one firewall, when there's just antivirus, okay. You need to really look into multi-layer defense. You have to be proactive. Definitely, you have to look into your patch. Okay, how are you doing your patching? Do you allow your staff to bring their own devices? What awareness have you done? It is great that we talk on our webinar, but at the same time, what programs are we having in-house for our own staff? Okay, next, please. Can I have the next slide, please? Okay, so wrapping it up again, what's keeping you up at night? Yeah, next, please. Can I have the next slide, please? Okay, so let's look at it. Let's recap. Okay, we need to look into this. Every incident that happens, okay, it is not just something that you react. Could you have done something different? What else have you done to your systems? Okay, do you understand what is the threat landscape? Do you have any intelligence of what's going on? And again, yeah, very important here, understand that you are working in an ecosystem. Yeah, you have your partners. It is not just your weakness also, it is also your partners. How do you communicate with them? And again, I think I can't stress this enough. Awareness. End of the day, we need to make sure our employees understand if they are bringing in their own devices, what policies do we have? Do we have our IT security policy? Do we have a BYOD policy? What training are we giving to our staff? Next slide, please. Okay. End of the day, the bottom line is, of course, people, process, and technology. And of course, next slide, please. Okay. I think this is well known. Yeah. When it comes to human stupidity, okay, we can patch our systems, we can patch our network, we can patch our applications, but unfortunately, there is no patch to human stupidity. Okay. The only thing that we can have here is we have to keep on building them, training, awareness, make sure they know what's going on, have policies and enforce those policies. Next slide, please. All right. So some of the checklists that you need to have, make sure you have your backups, uh, strengthen your network, passwords, patch management, and I guess I'm gonna pass on next back to Willie and Sorab to cover more on that in detail. These are my contact details. If there are any questions, feel free to ask at the end of this webinar. Okay, with that, my apologies. I've taken 5 minutes extra. Thank you. That's all. Pass back to you, Janice.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Anwar, for your sharing on the different cybersecurity strategies that companies should have and should be aware of in both IT and OT environments, such as the compliances, the framework, the regulations that you mentioned. And the amount of cyber attacks is increasing daily in this digitalized era, which is why it's very important to take cybersecurity very seriously. So before we move on to the next speaker, please feel free to ask any questions you may have towards our speakers, and do not hesitate to drop all your questions in the right-hand column. We'll come back to them at the Q&A session later on. Okay. Next up, we'll have Mr. Willie, who is now currently the Vice President of Marketing in Versec, to be our presenter. Mr. Willie leads Versec Marketing with over 20 years of experience in product marketing, product management, outbound marketing, communications, digital marketing, and demand generation. He has worked with a wide range of global enterprises to help them meet evolving security challenges. With extensive experience in a range of IT domains, including network security, global data privacy laws, data loss prevention, access control, email security, and cloud applications, he's a frequent speaker at industry events and author on IT security and compliance issues. A graduate of Stanford University, he has held marketing leadership positions in the US and Europe at many different companies. So let us now welcome Mr. Willie.
Well, thank you very much for that nice introduction, and thank you, Mr. Anwar, for a really good overview of some of the security issues. So I'm going to briefly talk about a new security model that I think is important, particularly for critical infrastructure, and how we're trying to change the dynamics of this battle that we're going through. You know, the combination of COVID and all of these cyber threats, I like to say, are a perfect storm that have come together. And it's important now that we really not only be vigilant about security, but also think through how we're protecting things. Now, when we talk about this, I think it's important to think about, well, what is important to you? What's important to your business? And a lot of this really revolves around your applications. And, you know, software applications run the world. I think Mark Andreessen said this 10 years ago about software eating the world. But they're increasingly complex, they're distributed, they're interconnected, and there's a greater attack surface area. And attacks on critical applications have skyrocketed. We hear a lot about phishing attacks and things that people see every day, but it's really the ones that we need to worry about are the people who are going after our critical resources, our crown jewels. And we are committed at Versec to trying to reinvent security to really focus on protecting things from the inside. And I'll explain a little more about what we mean about that. So in order to do that, I think I need to give you a little bit of a overview of some of the phases of security. I've been around security a long time and I've seen a lot of this. But I think the first wave of security that has been developed over the last 20 years really focused on the network and the perimeter, stopping threats from the outside. We used to say, keep your outside, keep your the good stuff in and keep the bad guys out. And this has been effective to a point, but it is really limited in its ability to understand what the target is, what the applications are. Now, along with this, the next wave of security, I think, can be thought of as protecting endpoints. And both of these are, of course, important. I'm not suggesting we get rid of them. But endpoint protection really focuses on the devices, the users, the workstations that they're using, but not as much about those critical applications. So I think the next phase of security, and not just coming from us, but you hear this from a lot of vendors now, really focusing on protecting critical applications. And we believe in order to protect critical applications, you really have to understand what they are and do that from the inside. Now this image, you can see some of the stats out there. First of all, applications and servers and workloads are really the majority of what is being targeted in attacks. So if you think about, everything you hear about, phishing and other attacks on your endpoints and even ransomware, the majority of these attacks are going after these crown jewels, your enterprise applications. And the numbers are startling that the vast majority of applications have some sort of vulnerability. Now, the problem with these traditional layers that I talked about is they're somewhat blind to the application. They don't really know what's going on, and it's not really their fault. That's where they're positioned. So what we do is try to start from the inside and really understand the applications. I'll explain briefly how we do this, and really make sure that they're only doing what they're supposed to do. So the first important thing is you have to protect all kinds of applications, not just your custom code. You have to protect legacy apps. You have to protect SCADA apps, off-the-shelf software, and you have to do it in whatever environment people are running it in, if it's on-premise, if it's hybrid, or even in containers. Now, the other important parts here that you need to think about when you're considering security, and this is not just about our solution, but you need to look with your applications, are you protecting all of the important layers of that application? So some applications obviously have a web front end, and you hear about things like SQL injections, cross-site scripting, a lot of these attacks. But there's a whole new wave of very insidious attacks that are going after the memory as applications are running, buffer errors, stack smashing, a whole host. And then there's lots of other attacks that are going after the host itself. Trying to change the files that are running, corrupt change the libraries, things like that. Now, in order to protect things from the inside, as I've described, it's really important that we move beyond these perimeter layers. I like to think of these legacy tools as being flashlights. They shine a small beam of light on a particular area, but they're not necessarily able to see beyond their own particular area. So what we do is really look at all of everything that's going on within the application, and we do this as it's executing. We look at the processes, the memory, the libraries, the files, the input, and try to understand what's happening. Now, visibility is important. Certainly, security always starts with visibility, but the next important thing then is with this visibility, you have to understand what the applications are supposed to be doing. And I won't go into a lot of detail here, but essentially, there's a new concept of essentially mapping what is allowed, what the application is supposed to do, what are the proper files, what are the proper libraries, what input is allowed, and then down to the memory level. This diagram is a simple view of how most software executes. It goes from point A to B to C to D, but at the memory level, if it goes off the rails, many of these advanced attacks, buffer errors, things like this, the attackers are trying to get your software to misbehave, essentially go somewhere where it's supposed to go. And through our technology, because we've mapped correct behavior, we're able to spot these deviations instantly. Now, one thing I wanted to point out, a lot of people, I mentioned endpoint protection, EPP stands for Endpoint Protection Platforms, as well as EDR, Endpoint Detection and Response, really different versions of trying to protect your endpoints. One of the things I think that is misleading, it's been around for a while, is the technical view that all endpoints are alike. And actually what's starting to be understood is that applications, servers, workloads are very different from your user endpoints. And in fact, analysts like Gartner and others are warning now that using things like EDR products or just plain antivirus or endpoint protection products are not adequate to protect these server applications. And remember what I said, that 70% of these attacks are going after your servers. And particularly when we're talking about critical infrastructure, there are additional issues with signatures and latency and things like this. So if you're just using, say, a traditional antivirus or endpoint protection tool, you really need to reconsider. And really where the state of the art is going is real-time protection down to the memory level of the complete application stack. And there are a number of analysts and reports that we can share with you that are validating this. So finally, I'll talk to some use cases and then hand it off to my colleague Saurabh, who will go a little deeper into the critical infrastructure and ICS space, where I think many of you are from. But some of the use cases, we have customers all around the world now. In many cases, they're trying to protect this full application stack. We have one of the largest chip makers that uses this for, we protect their entire customer portal, which is connecting very sensitive information from their customers. Also, legacy applications, anything that's difficult to patch. Mr. Anwar mentioned patching. Patching is always a problem, always a pain, and many people don't want to admit that it's difficult and doesn't get done on time. So with our model, we're able to let your legacy apps, let your unpatched apps run safely because we assure they only do the right thing, even if your patches aren't all up to date. Of course, you want to patch when you can, but no one can patch every day. And then finally, critical infrastructure and SCADA systems, I'll let Saurabh take over here. But as I mentioned, we think it's important overall that we really rethink how we're doing security, not just keep doing the same things that we've been doing forever, because the attackers, frankly, are very advanced, and in many ways they're ahead of many of us. So we really need to up our game in order to protect adequately. So thank you again, and I hope to take some questions for you during the Q&A. Now I think we can hand it to Saurabh.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Willie, for your great insight on how this rapid shift of remote working has caused many security challenges in the ICS system. There's no doubt that we need to look beyond conventional endpoint security tools in order to secure our critical systems. So following up after Mr. Willie, we'll now have Mr. Saurabh, the Vice President Sales of ICS and Strategic Accounts in Versec, as our next speaker. Mr. Saurabh is the Global VP for Business Development at Versec, a cybersecurity product company based in San Jose, California. Saurabh has 20+ years of technology sales, partnerships, and alliances experience working with Fortune 500 customers in the US. In this leadership role at Versec, Saurabh heads the strategic partnerships with leading ICS vendors and working cohesively with them in bringing most comprehensive security technology to their end customers. Before joining Versec, Saurabh was VP Communication Business West at Tech Mahindra, leading the strategy for new business development and joint go-to-market with key technology players. Without further ado, I shall now pass the floor to Mr. Saurabh.
Thank you so much, Jen, for the kind introduction. And thanks, CTI Resources, for having me here. Very excited to be a part of this webinar. And there's some great information, great insights that that both Willie and Mr. Anwar talked about. Just wanted to ensure if you're able to see my screen. Can someone please confirm if you're able to see my screen here?
Yes, we can see it.
All right, let me just, okay. Right, so real good points that Mr. Anwar and Willie touched upon. The massive growth in the attack scenario that we have seen in the post-pandemic scenario. A lot of attacks, in fact, as per the IBM recent report, the attacks on OT infrastructure actually grew 2,000% year on year as compared to the last year. So that's really a worrisome thing to talk about. But as we are talking about as to how we change the security and how do we look forward to introducing new technologies so that these new attacks and the way things are now looking so bad for the critical infrastructure, as Mr. Anwar talked about, the guidelines and the policies that they have launched, the Malaysian government has launched through national cybersecurity policy. Similarly, here in USA also, in the pandemic, the USA Homeland Security and NSA and CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agencies actually released a guideline on national policy to strengthen and maintain secure, functioning, and resilient critical infrastructure. So it's very important for us to talk about all those things. So I will just jump into the presentation and talk, walk you through some concepts, as Willie talked about the introduction of Versec technology, which is kind of radically different from the conventional security control. Our approach is very, very different I would say 180-degree opposite in terms of how we look at things and how we look at threats. And that's one reason as to we are not a probabilistic security model. We are rather very, very deterministic. So we work at Versec, we work very cohesively with the leading ICS vendors like Aviva, Schneider Electric, and others. We solve some of the most critical cybersecurity problems, which is like protecting the critical assets and infrastructure against the zero-day attacks, memory, ransomware attacks that everybody is so much worried about these days. And our customers, as Willie talked about, various Fortune 200 customers that we have onboarded in a very, very short time. We have got manufacturing giants that we work with, Department of Water Resources customers, power grids, food and beverage, telecommunications, and the list goes on. We also work very, very cohesively with governments and defense sector, not just in US, but against, across the globe. And because of our unique technology and the radically different approach that I, mentioned and also Willie talked about when compared to the other cybersecurity solutions, Aviva partnered with us to strengthen defense against the cyber attacks, where the conventional security solutions often fail. When we hear about these attacks happening nowadays, pretty much every single enterprise is going through attacks. Large enterprises are getting attacked, as Mr. Anwar talked about. Even the top names, top banks, top enterprises, top manufacturing customers, they have got all the money and resources in the world to have the right security solutions, and they do have the security solution, but still they are getting attacked. It means that there is some piece which is missing somewhere, and that piece is like these new age attacks, the zero-day attacks, the memory attacks that Willie talked about. Because when these attacks actually pass through these conventional layers, what these conventional security solutions see is just benign data. But when this data gets into the process memory, it kind of poison the process memory and launches an attack, allow the attacker to do a remote code execution and things so on and so forth. So we have been focusing very much into solving our problems, specifically for critical infrastructure and ICS customers. So these are the top use cases out of so many ICS customers that we have got. These are the, I think, top 6 use cases that we have been addressing for those customers. Now, the number 1 point on this slide is the targeted attacks. So now it's not just the commodity users or the script kiddies, as we used to call them earlier, but there are organized cyber gangs. I think I read somewhere that there are more than 2,000 companies which are running as organizations, which are the whole aim. People actually come there 9 to 5 and they work just to attack, launch ransomware attacks, and make money out of launching attacks on various businesses globally. And also we are aware that nation state attackers are also kind of attacking, and specifically the critical infrastructure. All these national cybersecurity policies that Mr. Anwar talked about, and the guidelines that NSA and CISA have put together, they are predominantly focusing and talking about the attacks coming in on critical infrastructure, because there are it's not just the monetary aspect of those attacks, but there is a catastrophic aspect somewhere related to these critical infrastructure companies being exposed to cyber attacks, like a nuclear power plant or a power grid or Department Water Resources. The consequences can be really, really damaging. So that's one. Now, when these attacks are coming in from sophisticated attackers like targeted attacks, they are launching attacks like the zero-day attacks or the memory attacks, drop chain attacks, blind drop attacks, where in these attacks, there is no file to be transferred. And as the name suggests, zero-day attack is the attack which is happening for the first time. So you do not have even prior information about that attack. So cyber security companies, security controls, which often rely on external source of information for them to be effective, like a signature or a behavior or a pattern or heuristics, or maybe some form of tuning and learning, they often fail against those kind of attacks. And even if they do, mitigate or save from some zero-day attacks, they cannot do it like in a foolproof way. They cannot do it 100 out of 100. So basically, that's very important for you to know. An attack which is happening for the first time, where you do not have any prior information, Versec actually can protect against those attacks also, because Versec does not work on kind of blacklisting way or protecting against from known bad. We really don't care about the signature or any other external source of information for us to be effective. As Willie touched upon, we are protecting applications from inside. What we do is we ensure that the application continues to run its intended functionality and it never deviates from normal. So that's the thing. And this technology, you know, for the technology enthusiast here in the audience here, it's control flow integrity. What we ensure is control flow integrity, which means that the application is always running its original intent. So that's the #1 problem that we are solving for our critical infrastructure customers. Patching, Mr. Anwar talked about it. Willie also touched upon that. There's a big problem across the board, but more so for the ICS and critical infrastructure customers. And there are multiple reasons for that. First and foremost, you know, that ICS customers often run legacy applications. Sometimes, you know, they are running operating systems and the applications and software which are already kind of, you know, EOL already. There is no support available from the platform vendor or the software vendor, but they're still running it. Secondly, you know, we talk about digital transformation. We talk about maximizing the assets and running those production lines 24/7. So sometimes even they know that they have a patch, but they are running under business pressure to not take the operation line down and apply their patch. So there is a huge problem, and we solve that by virtual patching. So Versec actually, as I talked about the control flow integrity part, which means that even if you are running a vulnerable application where there's a known vulnerability in the software that you're running, even then, you know, if an attacker comes in and tries to exploit that vulnerability, the attacker would, you know, would tend to deviate from the application control flow. He or she will rather either probably infiltrate data, you know, maybe drop in some shells or maybe Trojans, malware, or some code that he or she wants to run, or maybe exfiltrate data because they want to steal your IP, your customer information, and so on and so forth, or maybe, you know, just encrypt your files so that they can launch a ransomware attack on you. All these things will deviate the control flow of the application, and Versec won't let that happen. So the moment an attacker comes in and tries to deviate, in microseconds we can catch it, and in milliseconds we can launch a protection action. So basically, even if you're running an unpatched solution, a vulnerable application which is not patched, you can rest assured, you can have complete peace of mind because Versec is protecting you. So that's a big use case for a lot of customers in the ICS world, especially. Then, you know, in the new normal, as Mr. Anwar talked about, Jane also kind of, you know, touched upon that topic, that IT/OT and convergence is happening big time. There are a lot of companies, they were already on the digital transformation journey. They kind of expedited it. But the ones who were kind of reluctant to jump onto that bandwagon have been forced to do that, and they are now allowing their remote workforce to access systems which were not supposed to be accessible remotely because they were not designed keeping the security in mind. And some of the legacy systems that I earlier talked about, they were designed when the world seems to be a nicer place, not like today, where people are launching attacks, you know, left, right, and center. So when you talk about digital transformation and IT and OT convergence, the advantage that we bring to our customers is that Versec is one technology that can seamlessly cut across the two domains. You may find a lot of technologies, cybersecurity technologies that focuses predominantly on the OT side of cybersecurity, and then you have the conventional players like the EPP, EDR, the WAFs, and the firewalls, network security layer that Willie talked about. They focus more on the IT side. But when you talk about the convergence, you know, you need a technology that can seamlessly play in both the domains without letting the ball drop. So that's what we bring to the table for our customers who are on their digital transformation journey. In fact, there's a white paper that we have written together with our ICS customers, specifically targeting that you may find on our website. Then air-gapped environment and lack of connectivity, that's another very important aspect. That you know, if you're relying on technology, security control, which actually is dependent on some external information, be it signature updates or patterns or data, then you either have to provide connectivity for the signature updates to happen so that, you know, your technologies stay current and effective, or or maybe if you are not updating the signatures, then you are running stale technology, which is not able to handle the attacks of probably yesterday or maybe since the time it was last updated. So that's a problem. WordSec does not require any external source of information. Our source of truth is the application on which we are deployed, the server, the engineering workstation that we are protecting. So it's important that the map and the signatures that we rely on is the application. So we don't have to go outside, connect to the internet, get signature updates and all that. So we are well suited for air-gapped environments because we really do not require any connectivity. System integrity and application control, the slide that the Gartner slide that Willie showed, the basic hygiene, operations hygiene, of course, is there. Mr. Anwar talked about that as well. But it's very important for you to ensure that no malicious file or alien file or maybe process should be allowed to run in your system, because in ICS environment, typically as per the studies, like 50+% of attacks actually happen through partners, USB sticks, and disgruntled employees and insiders. So basically, it's very important for you to have a control in place where you do not allow any external or malicious or alien file or executable or DLL or any other malware to be there on the system. So this is something that we ensure. Our VSP host capability will absolutely ensure that your application or your systems, your engineering workstations are running only the files which are allowed, only the processes which are whitelisted. And again, last but not the least, is a very important point that WordSec is a bolt-on security. We are completely non-invasive, non-intrusive approach. We do not have an SDK that we provide to the customer that, hey, go write your secure code. No, not like that. So, and that's the reason we very well, kind of protect the applications which are new, but also the legacy ones, because, sometimes through acquisition, people have kind of created a disparate kind of a solution stack, where some of the developers, some of the applications, you don't have, those tribal knowledge. Then how would you go ahead and change those applications? So it's impractical for you to assume that you will need the source code to have the security effective. WordSec works on the legacy systems, operating systems, applications, and the code, and we do not need the source code. It's a completely non-invasive, non-intrusive approach. Moving on, this is a slide that it's a kind of a repeat for you, but I just wanted to emphasize on the aspect that the visibility aspect of WordSec is very, very high. We covered the entire server workload, as you can see, from the file system to system call interface to memory pre-execution to memory execution. We have complete visibility, and that too in a correlated context. So the kind of attack that we can detect is very deterministic. Not only that, because we have very deep visibility, the forensics that we capture about an attack that we protect and detect is very, very granular. Like, we can actually pinpoint to the line of the code, to the function, to the package, to the procedure being called, which has got the vulnerability, so that information can go back into the developers of the original applications, and a protective action can be taken. While on the left-hand side, the conventional security controls have very limited visibility, and when they sniff and sort through the data which is passing through them, they don't know as to how that data is eventually going to be processed and consumed by the application, and what action will happen in the process memory, because it's a black box for them. They don't have a visibility. So if you can't see it, you can't protect it. It's like that. Mr. Anwar talked about it, so I 100% agree with that approach. And now this is like a little dated slide. It came from the Panda Labs annual report 2017, but the concept is very, very important and clear here, and that I wanted to share with the audience. That dwell time that you have. Often you talk, people talk about the attack propagation and kill chain. When it comes to WordSec, these are obsolete terms. Obsolete. We don't worry about the attack, kill chain, and the propagation. What as you can see from the report, that many times, in seconds, minutes, and hours, the initial attack and the compromise starts happening right away. When an attacker gets into your system, they start compromising your system, whether stealing information or doing some kind of espionage or something like that. The activity starts right away. From initial compromise to discovery part, 31% of the companies actually, it take them years to find whether they have gotten attacked or they have been compromised. They don't know for months and years that there is some sort of this activity happening. So by the time you realize that some malicious activity is going on within your applications or environment or critical infrastructure, it's already like months and years late. Now when you've discovered that you've already been compromised, to the containment part, the resiliency part, it also takes like months for people. So it's really this chart actually shows as to how important is for you to minimize that dwell time that you give to the attacker. And in case of Versec, the dwell time we give to the attacker is only milliseconds. So the moment we see any malicious activity, the moment there is a vulnerability that gets exploited, the attacker comes in and we just take action on that attacker right away. So again, to emphasize, the kill chain and attack propagation are obsolete terms for us. We don't care about all that. So we have done, to win these partners, ICS partners, as I talked about, they are massive names, and we are a young company. For us to have their support and their partnership, we had to really prove all our claims to them. And this is one of those exercises that we have gone through, the major ICS partners that we work cohesively with. When we said that our technology works this way, they said, okay, here are the real malware for all these most visible and most damaging attacks that have happened on the OT world, like Stuxnet, Black Energy, WannaCry, and so on and so forth, as to how a Versec would detect and protect against these attacks. So we were made to run under the simulation environment of these attacks. And these green blocks, as you see, the column that you see underneath the Stuxnet is the attack kill chain and attack propagation that you have for Stuxnet. And these green blocks are the point where Versec would have intercepted and stopped the attack. So it is a real technology. It's not just lightware. We are already deployed in many department of water resources, power grids, nuclear power plant, manufacturing customers. And this on the OT side, and the IT side, there are many technology companies, telecom companies that we are already protecting. Now, this is a little bit information for those who are interested in the OT Purdue model as to what layers of security we operate in. So as you can see, level 2, level 3, the level 4, and in the internet DMZ that you have level, we of course our IT technology will take care of the level 4 and above. And level 3, level 2, where the SCADA and the operation software are running, like the HMI, the historians, the MES, and the ERPs that you have for your application, we can protect them all. And we are kind of technology agnostic. We can pretty much come and protect all our technology. There are some part of our protection layers which require compatibility with some specific vendors, but our VSP host, which is the underlying technology that can protect pretty much any server that is running in an OT environment. So I think with that, I end my presentation, and I look forward to answering some of your questions in the Q&A that follows this.
Show my screen there. Yes. Yes. All right, thank you, Mr. Sarah, for your amazing sharing about Versec and its unique technology that can heighten industrial defense against sophisticated and indefensible attacks at near 100% accuracy. Versec can indeed play an important role during this ongoing pandemic, helping businesses reduce costs while increasing security. If any of you guys are interested in Versec, you can contact our sales personnel for more information. So next up, we'll be moving on to our Q&A session, where I'll be reading out all the questions that have been collected so far during the webinar. Okay, the first question that we have is, what is the difference between Malaysia's cybersecurity strategy and the national cybersecurity policy? Mr. Anwar?
Sure. All right, thank you for the question. Can you hear me? Can hear, okay,
yes,
great. Okay,
your screen.
Sure.
your webcam.
Oh, okay. I gotta turn it on again. Sorry. Okay. All
Okay.
right. Sorry. Okay. Okay. The difference is one, the national cybersecurity policy is about, I think, 10 or 12 years old. The strategy is new. It's only about 2 weeks old. Again, policies are basically high-level guidelines. You know that 10,000, 20,000 feet. How are you going to get to your targets? How are you going to achieve certain things? Uh, Strategy are basically the specific targets. How you want to achieve those objectives. So in terms of the national cybersecurity policy, we have on how are we going to do the risk framework, the risk guidelines for our critical national information infrastructure. So that is the main thing. In NCSP, the National Cybersecurity Policy, we are looking at the CNIIs. But the cybersecurity strategy, it covers everybody. It covers the rakyat, the people, the SMEs, academia, and everything. So that basically is a big difference between the new strategy and the old policy. I hope that helps. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Anwar, for your answer. Okay. Next up, we actually have a question asking, may I know why EPP and EDR solutions don't work for servers? Mr. Willie, could you get this one?
Willie, you're on mute.
Okay, there we go.
Okay.
So there's a number of reasons. One of the probably most basic is that these technologies need some prior knowledge of attacks. And that typically means you need a signature. And this is well-established technique, but it's particularly in ICS environments, signatures are difficult to update, and it's a never-ending game. You know, there's thousands of new attacks. So these signature databases become larger and larger, and they don't deal with the new attacks that have not been discovered yet. I think the other reasons are also that this model can cause a lot of latency and can cause performance issues as well. So when you're talking about a laptop, it's maybe okay to update your signatures every few days and the performance isn't as big an issue. But when you're talking about a critical server that's running an important application, these solutions just were not engineered for this type of environment. Anything you wanted to add to that, Saurabh?
Yeah, I think you covered it, but only other thing that analysts are also very openly talking about it now.
Yes.
In fact, the Gartner slide that Willie showed, it showed the pyramid, where it showed that as you go up the pyramid, the technology becomes less and less critical. And I'm not sure if you paid attention out there, the EPP EDR was right at the top of the pyramid, which means that Gartner and other noted analysts are also talking about EPP EDR solutions not being effective for server workloads for the obvious reasons that Willie talked about. So you know, I think it's important for people to have technologies which are focusing more on the server workloads, cloud workloads, engineering workstations the way we do, rather than using the conventional security solutions which have got a lot of holes in it.
Only other thing I'll mention, a lot of the newer EDR solutions really depend on feeds from the cloud as well. And that's really not a good idea and not practical for servers, particularly in the critical infrastructure.
And they're kind of attacks which they completely fail against, like blind drop chain attacks is something an EDR can never address for you. So while they of course from in my slide that I talked about the 6 points, of course one was that signature updates and the connectivity requirement for air-gapped facilities, which is kind of a big no. But even if in the IT environment also we are winning a lot of customers and replacing those solutions because of the same concept that
it's 11 hours.
Yeah. All right.
All right. Thank you, Willie and Saurabh. We actually have a question that's for Willie and Saurabh, asking, with the perimeter shifting from core DoD to now people working from home, how does Versex solution protects the people working from home? Do you need?
I'll start. I think there's a couple parts of that. It's one of the challenges with working from home is we're now accessing many things that were off limits before, particularly with critical infrastructure. It used to be viewed as isolated environments. You can only access it from inside your facility. So I think it's what we can do, I'd phrase it this way, is we can make it safer for remote access. We can make it safe that you can access these legacy systems, but we'll still protect them. And that's, that's more and more important these days, obviously, because we have to be working remotely.
Right. As we talked about the perimeter security approaches, as they have very limited vision on the data being passing through them, when they sort and snip the data, they do not know as to whether this data is going to be launching an attack in the process memory or not. And I'm specifically talking about the memory attacks. So it's important for you to have a solution which protects your application being accessed by whoever, remote user, internal user, internet user, from inside. And that's where our control flow integrity approach actually comes really handy, because we don't care as to where the application is being accessed. What we are ensuring here is that the application never deviates from its normal control flow. So you probably, I'm just trying to refer to the slide that Willie showed, that when an application is loaded into the process memory, we extract a map out of that application from binaries. We extract a map, and when the application runs at runtime, we ensure that the application is exactly running as per the map. And that's the reason we are able to kind of claim that every application protected by Versec is virtually patched, just because of that concept. I hope that answers.
All right, thank you, Mrs. Saurabh and Mr. Willie. There's another question that's for Saurabh, asking, you mentioned about Versec not working in signature environment, hence do you maintain your own library of threat signatures?
All right, good, very good question. So basically, our signature is the application code that we are protecting. So we do not have any signature. We have our, if you talk about the file signature repository, so that, let me take a step back here. There are three different components to our solution. One is the VSP host, which actually protects you from, the file integrity and the system application control and system integrity kind of attacks. So there we actually create a file signature repository for every legitimate file that is allowed to run on your workstation. So that is there, which means that any alien file, if someone sticks a USB drive and there are trojans and malwares coming and trying to launch spawn a new process, we won't let that happen. So that's the signature that we are locally creating for our OT customers. But when it comes to the reliance on external signature updates like you typically get from antivirus companies, EPP, EDR solutions on your laptop also, that is not needed, because our signature and the map that we extract to ensure that the application never deviates from normal is drawn from the application itself, and that is residing right there on the server where Versec is protecting the application. So we do not need any signatures.
And I'll just mention that one of the fundamental differences is most security works on a blacklisting model. So find out everything bad and disallow that. The problem is there's an infinite amount of bad stuff out there. It keeps on coming. So we are really the opposite, a positive security model or a whitelisting model. So we map only what's allowed, and that's all it can do. And that's actually a finite problem that's solvable. So without getting too philosophical.
And not only the files, not only the DLLs or the executables, but we are actually whitelisting the processes also. So we are like way too deep.
Yeah, we take whitelisting to a much more extensive layer than level than most products do.
Exactly.
All right, thank you guys. Unfortunately, we're running low on time, so just one last question. Asking, can you guys recommend any EPP or EDR solution that can be used?
That's a hard question. That's a very hard question.
Actually, and we can environment. So we're not saying that EPP and EDR are bad.
Yeah.
In fact, we've now, not for the ICS space, but so one of our best customers is a big fan of CrowdStrike for his endpoints, but then he uses us to protect his servers. So, we're happy to coexist. I think all these layers are important, but you have to separate what you're trying to protect. So we're focusing on those core important assets, and it's also important to protect your other endpoints as well.
And we do not play in that space, as we have been right from, the word go, we have been emphasizing that we are only protecting the critical servers and assets that are running out of data center, cloud, hybrid environments. We are not protecting the laptops and the desktops and the mobile phones. So for that, you have to really rely on technology that works for you. And there are many EPP EDR vendors. It will not be fair for us to recommend one here on this forum, but do your diligence and choose the best for you for your endpoints. But when it comes for your server endpoints, we'll be happy to talk to you.
Yeah, we are actually partnering with many of the big traditional security vendors as well, who see that they want to add what we do.
Even as you said, it's a great point, Billy, that you brought up. Even the conventional security vendors have realized that and analysts like Gartner are openly talking about that as well. So you can't live in denial. So people are realizing that they are good in one domain, not good for other, and they are partnering with us so that the whole story can be created together for their end customers. So we are partnering with the conventional EPP EDR solution, and probably some of those partnerships you will get to hear soon. We are going to be making announcements probably in the next quarter or so.
And a couple of the big security vendors have deployed our product for their own purposes as well internally.
Absolutely, absolutely, yeah.
Good endorsement.
Absolutely.
All right.
Sorry,
Thank
we
you.
can't directly answer that question. I'm sorry, but I hope we've given you some insight.
Yeah, it's okay. For all the questions that we were not able to mention during this session, don't worry, we'll reply to your questions in an email following up. So don't worry, unfortunately we are running out of time, so we'll have to move on to our next session. Okay, so first of all, thank you for all the questions that was being asked by our attendees today. As mentioned just now, if we didn't get to your questions today, no worries, we'll have our sales come back to you in an email with the questions that was mentioned. So we're going to have a quick poll session for all our attendees today. Appreciate if you guys can answer these for our future improvement. So the first question is, have this session helped you in deciding what's next for your business? You may select one of the answer, yes or not really. Okay, so now for the second poll session. That second question is, I'm interested to implement cybersecurity for the company in the coming future. You can select one of the answers. All right, thank you for answering that. So for the third one, how relevant were this webinar to your job and your company? You may select one. All right. All right, thank you. Thank you for taking the time to answer all these poll sessions. This would help us a lot in improving in our next sessions. All right, and that's all that we have for today's session. Thank you again for joining us for our Series 3 webinar, How Cybersecurity Became the #1 Threat in the New Normal. We really hope that this webinar was beneficial to you all. Feel free to stay in touch with us via our email and our website as being shown on the screen. And don't hesitate to contact us for any questions or inquiries. We'd be happy to answer them all. Next up, we'll be having our Series 4 webinar where we will be discussing about asset performance management. So please mark your calendar and we hope to have you guys join us there. Okay, once again, thank you, Mr. Anwar, Mr. Willie, and Mr. Sarat for joining us and for participating in our webinar. And thank you to all our attendees today for joining us. And see you guys soon. Stay safe, everyone. Goodbye.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you all.
Thanks. Bye-bye.